So one thing you'll likely remember, sure, we earn money, our revenue. However, what makes profit is also considering how much of the revenue is left after our costs. Therefore, the second major constraint we will discuss is the organization's costs. Even if demand is there, it may not make sense for us to go into business if we cannot cover our costs. The break-even point analysis is a tool we will discuss in this section that takes into account our costs. So first, costs refers to expenses incurred by a firm in doing business, so marketing a product. We tend to categorize costs according to the type to better estimate and control our firm's costs. So they can be what's called variable costs, where they vary based on how much you're producing. It matters whether you're producing 5 or 500 units. So things like raw materials used to make the product. The other major form is fixed costs. These are paid no matter what. So things like salaries for the office workers or insurance. Sometimes you gotta remember that they will blend, such as how factories and overhead are usually fixed costs. But what if by producing a new unit, you have to open a new proverbial factory? So costs ideally act as a floor to start with when considering a price. You, of course, ideally will also look at demand, competitors, or the other products you're making. When thinking our costs, though, it's important to know what type of costs we have so we can better manage them. So now let's get into a break-even analysis. It's important to know when we will recoup costs so we can set our goals and anticipate cash flow. Certainly you set a price such that it usually should be more than your per unit costs. However, what about when you will recoup those fixed costs? So usually, again, we set a selling price that is above our variable cost for the unit, but that doesn't account for our fixed costs, and we want to know maybe when we've got those handled. So break-even analysis determines what sales volume must be reached before the company breaks even. After that point, any more units mean your fixed costs have been covered, and you have money to use for other purposes like research and bonuses. Typical break-even model assumes a given fixed cost and a constant average variable cost. The advantage of break-even analysis is that it provides a quick estimate of how much the firm must sell to break even and how much profit can be earned if a higher sales volume is obtained. Sometimes, however, it is hard to know whether a cost is fixed or variable. Furthermore, simple break-even analysis does ignore demand. Keep in mind this also will tell you just that you've broken even, you've at least made more than $0 in profit. It doesn't say to what extent you were profitable. Suppose you were already in production and making $1.5 million in profit. Now you learn you have to change the price. This one won't tell you if you're more profit than that original $1.5 million in profit. It only tells you when your fixed costs will be recouped. There is a formula that lets you see if you broke even in terms of past performance, but it's not part of the scope of this class. But if you want, I believe it's in one of the extra handouts I've posted to Blackboards. So what's the logic behind a break-even analysis? You basically want to know when you'll break even. That is, how many units do you need to sell such that your total cost will match your total revenue. Once you at least sell that unit and additional unit, any more units you sell will have profit that you can actually use for something other than those fixed costs. You can think of it this way. Suppose you have $7 for lunch every day, so that's a nice big number. If you don't use that full $7, you put the change into a piggy bank, which when full, you can buy yourself a new video game or go out for a nice outing or whatever. Suppose of those $7, you really only tend to use up $5 each day. So how many transactions, in this case days, would you need to fill up that piggy bank? Since each day, if you have about $2 extra, you can stuff that into the piggy bank. That's the idea of a break-even point. Your fixed costs are a hole that need to be filled by being paid. Every time you make some money, say that transaction, there's some money that has to be used for those costs. But there's hopefully some left over you can use to fill up that hole, say pay back your fixed costs. That's calculated. So we'll suppose our estimated demand is 4,000 units. Our variable cost is 50 cents per unit. Our fixed costs are $2,000. And our price is $1. So this is the formula. So from earlier, total fixed costs over selling price minus variable costs. So we plug it in. So 2,000, $1 minus 50 cents, and equals 4,000 units. Once I sell the 4,001st unit, I will have profit because the past 4,000 units covered the variable costs and paid for the 2,000 in fixed costs. So effectively, so remember, you can think of it this way. Each product is priced a little above its cost to sell, so every time you sell said product, there is a small contribution it can give to paying those fixed costs. So our fixed contribution in this case was 50 cents. For every unit sold, we had 50 cents left over after paying the variable cost needed to sell the product. That leftover money was then used to pay down our fixed costs. If your fixed cost contribution is very high, so your profit is maybe 75 cents out of $1, then the break-even quantity doesn't have to be that high because there's so much extra money that's put toward paying off the fixed cost for every unit you sell. If the fixed cost contribution margin is very low, then it will take a long time, therefore a very large number of units to break even. So what's the idea of this? The idea is that marketers look to costs, not just as those which are small and incurred each time a unit is produced, but also because costs can be big and a major debt obligation. It may take selling many units of product before fixed cost is paid for. Only then can you start allocating resources to other initiatives. Well, that being said, you probably aren't putting all that into your, it depends on what fixed costs are, since you can manage your obligations, but you get the idea. Okay, so let's focus on what it means that we hit our break-even point. Oh, but first, just as a reminder, there is this formula that you can use too if you don't like the other formula. It's total revenue equals total costs. Okay, now we can go to it. Let's see what we mean by when we hit our break-even point. Our projected demand is 4,000 units, while our break-even point is also 4,000 units. Does it make sense to go into business? Go ahead and think about it. Maybe. It depends on your objectives. 4,000 units and a 4,000 units of projected demand means that we just barely broke even. We just barely made it. That might be okay if you plan to expand to, say, a new channel, or you anticipate that it is only for a certain month, the next month demand will increase, or maybe you have other products in mind. However, it may not make sense to go into business because you actually didn't make a profit. You just covered your costs. You could be using your money and skills on a more profitable project. So even if we were below our break-even point, it may not be a bad thing if you have other objectives in mind. So for example, you may be using a fighting brand to try to stunt the growth of a competitor. Perhaps you are an ice cream shop, and it would make you look very silly if you did not have chocolate ice cream, even though only maybe 4 people would buy it from you. Perhaps you intend for this to be a way to gather a fan following. You intend for a later channel to get you more product, or rather profit. Or maybe you have or are developing a product line. The key thing is that there is other additional revenue that will come from somewhere, but it's got to be pretty certain. Here's an example from your book that shows you how you can graph your break-even point. So you can effectively see that at 400 units, your profit goes from negative to positive because you're now accounting for your fixed costs. Here's the chart that they use that people might use to visually look at those costs and what you're going for. So to wrap up, here is an example for you to calculate. So go ahead. So you can use either total revenue equals total costs, or use the fixed costs over your contribution margin. So a company has total fixed cost of $500,000. Its per unit variable cost is $5, and its per unit price is $10. What is the break-even point in sales dollars? Notice it says sales dollars. Now in terms of volume units. So we want volume in terms of dollar sales. Your formula will give you volume units, so you'll need to convert that number. So effectively you multiply your quantity with the price. So hopefully you've had time to look at the scratch paper and you can say, yes, I can calculate it. So 500,000 divided by $5, because that's the contribution margin, 10 minus 5 is 5, and you get 100,000 units. But we're not done yet. Determine the break-even point in sales dollars, multiply the break-even point in units to the sales price. This example, 100,000 times 10 will give you $1 million. So the best answer is C. So thus ends our section on quick little blitz on costs and how to use a break-even point. The next couple sections will more focus in on different types of tools we'll use when looking at different types of objectives like demand, cost, and so on. So this is your instructor encouraging you to run with your ideas, and I hope you have a good rest of your day or evening.